Right. Well, one of the things, if there's ever an apocalypse, is that we're not going to have YouTube, because without YouTube, I don't think I would have resolved or found the issue, the potential issue. It looks like, in my infinite wisdom of adding a fuel polishing system or fuel polishing relay to the existing system, I neglected to put in a check valve from the from the from the feed line to the or between the return line, which you can see here goes from cylinder 1 there, and so this little pump here, when pressurized, or when these valves are opened, takes fuel, diverts it through the pump back through the return, and then back to the tanks. So in essence, it's a polishing relay that uses the existing single filter array core that I've got here. And what I'm hoping is that when I install the check valve in that line there, it'll prevent that backup. But I'm gonna have to take off all of the injectors and crank the engine, and hopefully I haven't damaged a rod. I am very nervous actually right now, and we'll see how it goes. Right, well, cleaned up, and here's where we're at. So cleaned out the fuel system, and I installed a polishing relay, which goes to this split valve. So when the pump's on, I can either pressurize and go back to the return line, and there's a valve here to shut off backflow to cylinder 1 back here, or I can switch so that it pressurizes the entire system. So I've pressurized it to the secondary pump, pressurized it to the high pressure pump here, lots of pressure, works great. Great system, uses the existing filter for fuel polishing. So I'll just go over how or what I did to create the polishing system using the existing array core. So in this simple diagram here, this is the engine here in yellow. These are the fuel tanks. The forward tank is the main tank, and then there's the auxiliary tank, which is just aft of that. And you can see the lines here. So there's a green feed line coming out of the main tank, and then there is a different color green line coming out of the auxiliary tank, and then the red line is the return. And so what happens is both lines and the return all follow the same path down the starboard side, and they both go to the same switch, which is represented by this cylinder here up top. And so once they get fed to that switch, they go down through the feed to the array core, which is represented by this tan cylinder, And from the ray core, which is the only filter outside of the engine, then it goes to this blue circuit. And so at this location here, there's a T connector, and there are valves various places. So maybe I'll add those after, because it is actually pretty important. So to control which direction the pressure goes, and so this is just a fuel pump. And if we move down from the fuel pump, there's a Y valve where I can select either to pressurize the fuel system to the engine, and this is so from this T, you can either go through the fuel pump or to the actual feed line, but they all join up here. There's a valve on the main line so that I can shut that off, so that when the pump's running to polish the fuel, it's not pulling all the fuel back out of the actual tank or the fuel pump system. There is also there's a valve in line just as the return leaves the cylinder heads, and that's to prevent the backflow issue into cylinder 1, which is located aft here. So it's 1, 2, 3. And when the pump pressurizes, if you switch the Y valve and shut off fuel to the actual system, the engine, then it's going to return back down the red line, and it's going to polish the fuel that's coming in through the green line, through the ray core, either green line, so this is either the fore or aft tank, through the ray core, through the fuel pump, and then back down the return line. So it's sort of utilizing the return from the engine to also join a circuit or a relay for the fuel polishing. It's very simple. There's no additional ray cores. You know, most fuel polishing systems have the ability to polish multiple times or to switch between the active fuel system. That's not the case here. This is just very simple. There is a relay switch for the returns to both tanks here that was already in place on the boat, and so you can decide which tank you want the return to polish. So that's just a brief overview of the actual fuel polishing system.
You just got to be aware of where the flow is going, make sure everything's shut off. So I bled the lines, and then I actually bled the injectors, and I was not getting any fuel. So I went back and removed all 3 high pressure valves. And number 3, actually this is technically 1, cylinder 1, 2, 3. 1 was, the pin was seized, which either means that as I expected, cylinder 1 was hydrolocked, pressurized the fuel system backwards, and wasn't allowing any fuel. So hopefully, if I can sort this out using the manual, which is all printed off, just need to find the section, fuel system, I believe, fuel injection system, right? And so this has the entire schematic, and I'm just going to confirm that everything is in order. Put everything back together, and I'm really hopeful that it'll start up, because number 1 and 2 cylinders were trying to fire. My only concern is that if I did hydrolock cylinder 1, which is aft, counterintuitively, then that could have resulted in a bent crankshaft connecting rod, or some other damage. So, but everything's working. I got all the electrical working. Everything's working apart from the engine. And I think I may have just found an issue. So hopefully I'll keep you updated. Well, I don't know. Let's give it a go. Fuel on. Well, I suck at recording all this progress being made, but here we are. Engine. Put in a new starter, because apparently over cranking it, trying to get it going, overheats it, burns it out. Not good. What I've done here is I've replaced the ignition fuse, because after inspecting the previous one, it was totally corroded. So I've added a 30 amp spade fuse, because everything else is spade. And this wire runs all the way up to the ignition. You can see I disconnected the old wire, and this 10 gauge goes all the way to the switch, which I tightened up so that it's not loose anymore. Last time I went to start it, after getting everything primed up to the high pressure pump, it wasn't starting, but when I went to crank it, the starter failed. So to fix that, I upgraded the wire and put in a new starter. I need to figure out the alternator, because currently that is a bit of a mystery, and I don't actually have images of the previous configuration. So today I'm going to be taking out the injectors, making sure that they're bleeding fuel all the way to the cylinders. My concern is that because of the water lock in cylinder 1, there is some sort of debris in that cylinder. If that's the case, then that's going to be problematic. I've got an appointment with a mechanic to come out and look at it, but hopefully I can get it started today, and we'll go from there. So I'll give it a try. And that's no. So on we go.
Right. So I've disassembled all three injectors. And if you look at the manual, it says immerse the new nozzle, blah, 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 blah. Standing the nozzle holder upright, lift the nozzle about a third of its length. It should drop smoothly by its own weight when released. So this is what we're looking at here. Got this, right? So there's the nozzle holder. Now, I just needed vice grips to remove this pin from the nozzle holder. One of them was stiff. This is the cylinder 1 in question that was hydrolocked, meaning there may be some damage. So I'm going to try and see if I can lubricate this and get it to fall properly. But this looks to be a possible reason why we're not getting combustion. So here we've got the needle upright, lift it up, and you can see that it falls under its own weight. So I'm hoping it doesn't go all the way down, but that's just the pressure at the very bottom, I think. So I'm going to put this back together, reassemble it. So injectors are back in, and when I bled the lines, I was getting fuel to 1 and 2, but not 3, which meant disassembling the high pressure side. So I took all those out. Can you see that? Right, all 3, which are all here, disassembled. Now, you tell me if you can see the difference. Can you spot the difference? This washer was jammed in between there and there, requiring significant force using the vice grips to remove it. So interestingly, it affected cylinder 3, but that's a problem. So good to troubleshoot all the way back to the source. Just one thing from the manual, it does indicate that you need to keep all cylinder assembly mechanisms and parts independent of each other. So cylinder 1, 2, 3, all the parts. So try to find a washer. Yeah. So to follow up, no joy. The secondary high pressure pump is failing, number 2 piston, which means it's got to be disassembled, which means the front's got to be taken off. It's a nightmare. I give up. Well, I'm going to document this because this is a plus. Instead of having to take the water pump, alternator, and heat exchanger off, I just undid all the case bolts, pulled this off, and I was able to actually get the fuel pump out, which doesn't come out if that's all in place, or maybe it should, but I wasn't able to. So now I'm going to disassemble the fuel pump, make sure that everything's working. Right. So according to the manual, you need to line up the rack controls with the matching mark on the pinion of the control rack. And it looks like number 2 wasn't aligned when I disassembled this. So forceps valuable here. I'm just going to pull these out so you can see, because I can't find anything online showing this process. if you look at this, there's 3 marks on that rack. First, you got to make sure that there's no worn out teeth on either the control pinions. And then if you look inside here, you can see those marks. They're actually red, and you'll line them up. You take the forceps or whatever you're using, and you drop these guys in there, and you can see that there's a matching mark on each one of these. And we're going to line those up with the control pinion. And I can do this with one hand. Just drops in there. You can see, right? And so I think what happened is when I was over cranking it and taking it apart, this guy, number 2, got knocked out of alignment. And so it's only so much I can show you here, but all 3 of these are going to go in alignment. All right. The reason I'm doing this is because this assembly, all these parts here, $2,900 Canadian to replace. So far, I haven't actually found anything broken apart from the washer in the top assembly that got caught in the spring. But I just want to show you this because I think this may be the problem or the solution. And we're all about solutions. So you can see that these are moving freely and they're all properly aligned with the rack. And this goes to the governor, which is in here, which is controlled by that drive, which regulates the engine speed. So, back together. All right. I just want to explain how unimaginably difficult it is to get these springs and everything aligned. So this pin right here needs to go in alignment with a mark on the rack and pinion there. What is it called? The plunger valve. But then you gotta, god damn, you gotta put the pin in so that it seats properly and aligns with the mark that's on the side of it, with the mark that's in there. Once it's fully seated, you gotta take your forceps, pull it out so that it's out of its assembly, and then put the cap on it without moving it so that you can then compress the spring enough to get the pins in the side here. This has taken me 40 tries to get these 2 in. There may be a better way, but it's unimaginably complicated. So just be patient. Align everything. Push this right over to the side here so that you've got a position, a known position, and then it's like playing doctor, that old game. The old game we used to play, the doctor game where you got to pull the things out. It's like that. You can't move these pins at all. So I just want to go over briefly what I did to resolve the issue. So the original issue was that the auxiliary fuel tank hadn't been used and it had been sitting collecting diesel biofilm in the fuel lines. So I replaced all the fuel lines and repositioned the ray core and created the fuel polishing relay and redid all the wiring within the engine compartment, painted the engine compartment, cleaned everything up, and painted the engine, repositioned it on engine mounts, put everything back together, and I was not getting any pressure from the high pressure pump. It wasn't the fuel injectors. it was actually at the pump. But you can see here in this diagram that the plunger that runs down the middle has an obliquely cut lead, and the intake hole, number 4. The spring assembly that I just showed you allows the plunger to be pushed up and down on cams in the output shaft of the engine. And as the spring pushes the plunger up, the oblique lead matches the intake hole, and it dispenses a bolus of fuel into the delivery valve. And so the plunger and the plunger barrel, 1 and 2 in this diagram, are lapped, meaning that when they're machined, they are precisely matched when machined, and they need to be frictionless in terms of movement. So what I decided to do is take a piece of 500 grit wet dry sandpaper and just clean the barrel of the plunger. And then when I put it all back together, it actually got pressure to the high pressure injection pump. I was surprised that, I thought I'd have to replace the whole thing. So I put the high pressure lines to the injectors, and sure enough, I was able to bleed the lines all the way to the cylinder. And at that point, I turned over the engine and it started, but the governor is somehow disconnected inside, I'm guessing, or there's a missing spring, and it was starting to run away. So it took quite a few tries to get it actually to turn over, switch the decompression tabs, switch them back on, 1, 2, 3 cylinders at a time. And eventually it caught, and when it caught, it was, and just as an aside, it was watching this video on YouTube that made me realize I had to shut off the air intake. This is from Buckbz Runaway Detroit Diesel. Thanks there, Buck. I don't know who you are, but save my engine. And I thought it was going to blow the engine, honestly, so I covered the intake with a piece of 2x4. It wasn't enough. Luckily I had a piece of thick foam and sort of covered the intake, and it shut the engine down. I'm going to have to go back and troubleshoot the governor issue, but the fuel injection system now functions, and I actually think that it was only ever running on 2 cylinders. And so now it's a full 29.8 horsepower 3-cylinder Yanmar. So success after many months of troubleshooting this engine. Today was the final success. Right. Well, update. I got it running. Boy, did I ever get it running. I got it running, but it ran away, which meant that I had to stuff in a piece of foam in the air intake because it was just getting faster and faster and faster. But the high pressure fuel pump works. Instead of replacing the pins, what I did is I took 500 grit wet sandpaper and I cleaned the nozzle pins, which they're lapped. When they make them, they're lapped, meaning that they make the 2 parts together, so it's super calibrated. But just wanted to get fuel flowing. So I swapped them out, got the pressure to here, ran the pump, got it pressurized, ran the engine without the valves, got it going, and it took quite a bit to actually get it cycled. But the problem is that the governor, or the stop governor, is dislocated, which means I got to take the whole front off again, take the belts off, take the wheel off, take the pump off, pull the whole thing out, disconnect the fuel lines, and check why that is not functioning. But this is the end of 6 months of trying to get this thing going, stripping it, new engine mounts, rewired fuel system, everything. So I'd call it a success, or a partial success to this point. And we're looking good. Oil alarm not going on. So I got other stuff to do, so I'm going to call it a day. But man, a little bit scary having it run away like that, because there's no other way to shut it off when when a diesel has a runaway, and it'll blow the engine. So I'm fortunate that I was able to stop it by covering over the air intake, which is the only way to do it in that case. So there you go. Updates.